Running the floor, Embiid stuffs it.
Harden for three. James Harden with his second triple.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap Podcast. I'm here today with a very special guest at TrillBroDude on YouTube. You know him from the Bball Pod, the Slop God himself. Trill, appreciate you for coming on. How you doing today?
Doing well. Riding the high off of the Summer League debut. Summer Sixers, always a lot of fun. And then obviously coming down off the high of slop season. So a lot of stuff going on. Hopefully some more continues to happen because it's great for the brand. It's great for the fans. It's great for everyone just to have something to look forward to talk to. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get into it. Before we get going, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor here at Pick Swap Media. Check out thesportsdisplays.com for all your memorabilia needs. They have an innovative new product that is able to hang supplies on any surface, significantly cheaper than the general consensus on the market. So make sure to check them out. Click the link in our description. Use code PICKSWAP at login. So now to dive in. Sixers Summer League last night. This will be coming out after the second game, but just the first game is what we watched so far. So to start off with, you've been a very avid Jaden Springer defender throughout everything. I'm kind of on the same page as you, so I'm excited to get into it. So what were your thoughts on his first moments in the Summer League, and what were your takeaways?
Oh, I always get nervous with Jaden because, if you're not like a basketball sicko like we are, it is kind of, it's not like everyone can watch Tyrese Maxey and be like, oh, that guy's obviously good because he gets buckets and he's flashy and he does all of the things that you want your young player to do and show. Like my mom loves Tyrese Maxey, right? Like that's kind of the thing. Whereas like you really have to be like a true basketball sicko to like love a guy like Jaden Springer, because Jaden is more in theory than in reality because he's so young, he's so raw, he's got all these tools, but he's never been able to really put it together. So obviously it's funny because I was reading Kyle Neubeck's article before the game yesterday, and he said he predicted exactly what was going to happen. He was basically talking about like how, you know, the pressure that's on Springer now isn't the pressure that was on Maxey last year, because Maxey was a little bit older. He was already in the rotation. And like, now it's like Springer's just trying to show that he belongs in the league, which is obviously important, but like still, he's 19 years old. He's even younger than Maxey when we drafted him. He's younger than a lot of guys that was drafted in this year's draft. So you got to look at it like, you know, he's going into year 2, but he still has a ton of development and upside to go. And he predicted exactly what was going to happen, which is like he basically starts every game slow. He looks clunky. The handle didn't look great. The shot still looked weird. He wasn't being aggressive. And then as the game went on, he kind of, you know, felt out the game, made his impact on defense, which he always does. And then offensively, he showed some moments at least. I mean, overall, I'm kind of disappointed, Justin. Like when I look at Summer League games, I don't really look at like box score stuff. I don't really look at like, oh, he scored 20. Like anyone can score 20 points in Summer League. Like Furkan Korkmaz scored 40 points on 20 shots in Summer League a few years ago. Like that's not really an indicator. What I look for is like, how does the shot look? How does the handle look? How do the things that he should have been working on, do they look better? And honestly, the answer to that was no, so that was disappointing because I felt like the handle still looked really loose. I felt like the shot looked exactly the same. And from that point of view, it was disappointing. From a pure athleticism, getting to the line, getting to the bucket, drawing fouls, all of the things that we know that he can already do, it was just kind of a re-emphasis of why I think if he can fix, at least he doesn't need to have a great handle, but he just needs to be able to be like a capable secondary ball handler. And then also he needs to be able to just hit, catch, and shoot shots, because that can take his game from being like a not an NBA player to like a legit rotation player in the NBA in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. He's a weird blend of like polished and raw, because there's aspects of his game, like he has the NBA frame, the NBA body already. He plays extremely physical, gets downhill extremely well. I thought the Sixers did a good job of running sets to just have him a chance to just go hard at the basket and attack. And I think we're learning that that's one of the strongest points in his game. Led both teams in free throw attempts, got there double-digit times. but like there's aspects that are still certainly concerning, and it can't be forgotten just how young this guy is. Like you said about the players in the draft, being younger than him or being older than him already. He's still 19 and still is probably a couple years away from being like the player that we would hope. And in some regards, that's super frustrating as a guy that was a first round pick last year and a highly regarded guy going in the draft. But on the other hand, like he has these flashes like that final play where he just swallowed up that block attempt and made that crazy defensive play, that it just like the tools are there and he's going to be worth it in the long run. So I'm with you with sticking with it for him. And the thing I guess my largest concern with him is I'm still not sure what he positionally, how he fits in. And like it was kind of a tale of two halves, I thought yesterday, and that he looked a little bit lost offensively. He couldn't really find his stride in the first half. Sure. And then coming out of halftime is where he really kind of made an impact. And you see the elite of athleticism, the way he like hangs in the air and has those crazy finishes is something that's been foreign to the Sixers for several years and is super intriguing. But if he can finally put the tools together, I'm very intrigued with what he can be. Do you think he just purely would be kind of a shooting guard and that's his natural role as kind of a secondary ball handler? Or do you think?
So I honestly think like ideally for a guy like Springer, let's say the shot doesn't come along as well as we think it is. I think that I don't know if this would necessarily work on the Sixers because I think with the Joel Embiid, James Harden pick and roll, you need floor spacers around you at all times. But there are certain teams like the Nets, the Nuggets, the Warriors that can kind of get away with playing these guards/wings who aren't great shooters. Yeah. And they can kind of, function more off the ball as cutters, rollers, stuff like that. I wouldn't be shocked if he's super strong. He's very athletic. Like I wouldn't be shocked if he could build himself into that kind of player. But I honestly look at it like this. Like, look, Springer's a 2 right now. He's like 6'4" with a 6'7.5" wingspan. And he's like around 200 pounds. If you told me that in a few years he could play the 3, I wouldn't be shocked because the league just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And while there are some teams that are going in the opposite direction and trying to get bigger, I do think that like the modern like 3 is kind of like an extinct species at this point. Like there's only like a handful of guys you would even consider like pure small forwards in the NBA. The large majority of them are just really shooting guards playing small forward. And I do think that he could potentially get there, maybe be like a Bruce Brown, Lou Dort, kind of like a strong, smaller, big wingspan kind of small forward. The thing is he still plays like a power forward. So you would hope that, some of the guard skills could come along. But once again, like I'm just kind of convinced that like if the shot ever you could say this about 100 different prospects. If the shot ever comes along, he's going to be great. But with Springer, it just feels like that's like the final piece missing. Yeah. Because you saw the play where I can't remember if it was Kennedy Chandler or Trey Waters, but there was this play where he caught the ball in the corner, and I think because it's summer league and they're not like scouting the other team and having reports and stuff. They're kind of just like going within the flow of the game. The guy closed out on him hard. Right. And Springer just instantly got around him super quick to the basket, got an and one. And like, those are the kind of things that like the athleticism, once everyone's a little bit more athletic at the next level, it's going to be a lot harder to have those kind of plays. But if you are a legitimate catch and shoot threat, which I hope that he can become, then that becomes a very, very valuable, even just like if he's like a spot up attack closeouts guy. Like, could he become like a DeAnthony Melton? Could he become like a guy who over the course of his career gets better at shooting? Like Melton was not a good shooter coming in. He had at least something to work with coming out of college, and he didn't really become a good one until he was 22. So, Springer's still very young, and it's unfortunate that he's not really on the Sixers timeline right now, but that would be my hope, is that like he can be like a guard/wing who can function more primarily off the ball and then maybe as a secondary creator. But like I'm still very skeptical. Like handle is like something that guys usually have coming in. Like it's not really something that you can develop and become like a great ball handler over the course of years, with a few exceptions. So I would imagine he's more of a secondary guy and like kind of just like mainly off the ball.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of take it into. I could see him sliding into kind of that Bruce Brown, that Gary Payton type of role,
Sure.
where you're kind of that tweener guard kind of area. He also, I don't necessarily think he'll ever hit the peak of this player, but I still see a lot of Jimmy Butler in his game and just the way he uses his body, gets to get to his spots in that kind of area. So I still have a lot of hope for him moving forward. And I've been critical of the Sixers in the Bball Paul development, who we're gonna talk about in a second, for not using him more in a rotational piece. And he's a guy for Bball Paul specifically that I think he knows how to play when he's the man on the court and has touches fed to him. He struggles when he's a more complementary piece and fitting alongside Embiid.
Sure.
Springer, I feel the opposite. I think he's a guy that's going to continue to benefit from the more basketball, the better. Sticking in the G League, getting those reps is something that's going to be good for him. To talk about Bball Paul a little, I don't think we can get very far in yesterday's game without talking about him. I mean, a strong statement right from the start of him coming out and showing that he really didn't belong to be there and was worthy of being above that. But I can't imagine a summer league without Bball Paul. And what were your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Reed's awesome. He is like, he's the ethos of summer league for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a really talented guy who clearly is way above like the large majority of guys that are at summer league. But like also like I joked before the game yesterday. I was like, the Grizzlies summer league roster looks like the 96 Bulls. Like it's like some of my favorite guys that have come out of the draft the past few years. And even some more like meme type players like Tremont Waters and Kenny Lofton and David Roddy and guys that like I just personally like don't think that they're ever going to be like great NBA players, but like they're just fun watches and they can dominate in these kind of settings. And it was kind of telling to me that Paul Reed was like pretty clearly the best player on the court with Xavier Tillman, with guys Zaire Williams, who was a lottery pick last year, like guys that are legitimately really talented against a Grizzlies team that like, I think like what was their ninth man, like Dakota Mathias, who played real minutes for us last year, like a year and a half ago. So like, I do think that it is like the fact that Paul Reed is in a situation where he should be dominating. He's 22, 23 now. Like he should be dominating in these settings. But like, if he didn't come out and dominate, I would be worried. But like, he's just so insanely talented. He's going to hustle. The thing with Paul Reed I've always struggled with is kind of what you just talked about, which is like, how does he fit as a complementary piece, right? Like one of the reasons why a guy who struggled yesterday and Charles Bassey that I thought was like, might have been a better fit with James Harden was because he kind of fits the mold of big that James Harden has had, the Clint Capella types, the lob catchers, the Dwight Howard, the lob catching, rim protecting big man. But Paul Reed is just so clearly more talented than him and so clearly just better at basketball that I completely like, I'm trying to like rework how I evaluate players and like my opinions on players, because sometimes it is like, oh, how's this guy that dominates in the G League going to come up to the NBA when he's playing with like legitimate stars? But also like he does role player things really well too. Like he's a good switch defender. He can rebound. He can get in passing lanes with his length and athleticism. He can get running in the open court. You know, his on-ball skills aren't going to translate as much to the NBA, but it's a good thing to have, especially when he's a good finisher as a guy that can play inside. So, like, my thing with Paul Reed is, like, he's just shown so many times that he needs to be in the Sixers rotation, and if he isn't next year, you might as well trade him because, like, if he's clearly to me like the eighth man on this team. Like he's like the energy guy off the bench that can play a little bit of center. He'll probably be the backup center to start the year. And then he can also play a little bit of four, probably if you play him with PJ Tucker as the small ball center. So I just think that like Paul Reed is awesome. And like, I think he's legitimately going to have an impact on winning for the Sixers in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. So often we get caught up in kind of throwing players in like this archetype or category, and Paul Reed's really a guy that breaks all those. He just doesn't have a clean fit into pretty much whatever you look for. I think I'm very much in the pro Paul Reed camp. I think he's awesome. I've been so just thrilled with like a step towards modern basketball the Sixers were taking with. I'm in the corner of belief with like you'll never have a backup center, and we've ran through the Dwight Howards, the DeAndre Jordans, the Andre Drummonds. You can't have a guy that can step in and do Joel Embiid things because nobody in the NBA that can do things like Joel Embiid because he's one of the best players. So I think the way to counteract that is by going a new direction and having a new look, like a Paul Reed, a guy who is switchable, who's very versatile in what he does. Like, I don't think you're ever going to be surviving the Embiid minutes by just having a worse version of Embiid out there. You got to kind of zag a little bit and go a new direction, which is one of the reasons why I've been so on board with Paul Reed. Now, I love how he kind of takes it personal in these situations, how he's like, I am here to dominate. He's the same way in the G League, where he's like, if I want to be like an NBA caliber player, which he surely believes he is, he's like, this is my time to show that I'm significantly better than these guys. And I love that he kind of takes that approach every time, and we're seeing the same thing in Summer League. I think somebody who isn't as on board the Paul Reed train would kind of take a step back and be like, he doesn't look too much more refined. He's still the same kind of madness out there. Yeah. But I just love that. And I still believe like that contributes to winning, and it's something the Sixers miss. Like, we've talked so much about how this team like lacks like diving on the ball, just doing like the stuff, the little
being a dog.
Yeah, being a dog.
Seriously though, like just having a guy that will do the nitty gritty things that like you don't want your stars to do. Like, you don't want James Harden and Tyrese Maxey diving for loose balls and, box, obviously Harden's a pretty good rebounder himself, but like, he's not going to be doing the fundamental things that you expect out of a role player. And I think Paul is actually shown to do those things really well. And my whole thing is like, who cares if he fits the archetype? Like, he deserves to be there and he deserves to be on the court. And like, yeah, you're going to have some disaster games, but like you also did from traditional guys like Andre Drummond. Like, Andre Drummond was good for the Sixers, and he would have one out of every 4 games. You would be like, is this guy an NBA player? Like, he looks like an absolute disaster. And then he would have like 2 good games in a row, and you're like, oh no, he does belong. Like, there's just a lot of variance with backup centers. Like, they're not going to be great in every matchup. They're not going to be great on every night, but that's why they're backups. And like, Reed at least has more upside because of his versatility defensively, that like, at least you could like maybe see yourself getting to the point where like, if he's on the court with PJ Tucker, who's playing the small ball 5 or whatever 5 we have out there, like if that 5 can shoot, even Joel Embiid, like you might be able to get away with the fact that he's a non-shooter. Like, I think you can only play one non-shooter at a time, but like when he has the skill set of Paul Reed, where you can literally just like throw him on the block, like I think he'll be totally fine.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And like you brought up Andre Drummond there. Drummond also struggled greatly in the playoffs, and I get it was just a 4-game sample size for Brooklyn, but he looked really bad in that. And I've seen like the whispers of wanting like the Drummond return. Obviously, he made his choice and went to Chicago, but I'm still in the camp of like, I've been pounding the table for so long to see what we got in Bassey and Reed. Are you fine with going into the season as those two as our backup options, or do you think they should find a way to upgrade still?
No, I definitely think you should just go in with Bassey and Reed. And my whole thing isn't like young players better than old players, because sometimes that's not the case. Like, so for example, Hassan Whiteside's still a free agent, I think. If the Sixers signed Hassan Whiteside tomorrow, I would be fine with it, because Hassan Whiteside's actually pretty good as a backup. He's very similar to Andre Drummond in that regard. He might be a little bit more consistent, but like if Hassan Whiteside's your backup center, you're probably doing pretty okay. When he's your starter, you want to die because he's Hassan Whiteside. But when he is your backup, like he's good. But at the same time, like everything we've talked about, like Morey always talks about like, oh, you can figure out your rosters throughout the season, you can get guys at the deadline, you can get guys on buyouts, whatever. That hasn't worked out for the Sixers, but like with a position like backup center, I feel like you just got to trust Bassey and Reed. Like, I honestly, like everyone's kind of freaking out about Bassey being so bad yesterday, but I point to like Shake Milton in Summer League a few years ago when they had him running point for that one stretch and he was like legitimately a disaster. And then the next year he was really good for the Sixers in the bubble, in, when they needed a shot creating guard that came in and replaced Al Horford in the starting lineup that disaster year. So I look at it like, you can't really overreact to one game. And like, if Bassey is like, he'll probably be our 4th string center if you think about it, because I would imagine Paul Reed is the backup because he's just better and older and more like ready to play. Like, he already played playoff minutes last year. And then I think Doc would probably just go with Tucker as the small ball 5 option, because he's done it before. He's done it with James Harden. And I think that like, with the way that they've molded this roster, that like getting more defenders, getting more athletes, and more shooting, you can just kind of get away with playing those small ball 5 lineups a little bit easier. So I look at it as like Embiid as the starting center, obviously, Paul Reed as the backup, PJ Tucker as the third string small ball option, and then Charles Bassey in emergency situations. So I'm not really too concerned with the backup center thing. And I also think it's one of the easiest things to fix. Kind of what you said before, which is like, we keep looking at like, oh, we got to get a guy who can help us play in the same mold when Embiid sits. But it's really has nothing to do with who the backup center is. It has everything to do with the fact that Joel Embiid is one of the best players in the NBA. And when one of the best players in the NBA isn't on the court, your team's probably going to suck, with very few exceptions. Where like Ja Morant, like when Ja Morant goes to the bench for the Grizzlies, like, one Joel Embiid's better than Ja Morant, but at the same time, like when Ja Morant goes to the bench, like the Grizzlies can have these 5 insane defenders on the court at all times. So it just does feel like I don't want to get too caught up in the backup center thing, because it is super easy to fix. And like what are you going to look at last year's playoffs and say, well, when Embiid was out, we had to play DeAndre Jordan because Paul Reed fouled too much and whatever. And it's like, well, one, don't give Doc that option. And two, if Joel Embiid gets hurt, we're screwed anyway. So why do you even care? like we probably win that series if Joel plays, and one of the backups, whether it's Reed or Jordan or whoever, probably could have survived 5 to 10 minute stints. Like even as bad as DeAndre Jordan was and how much I was pulling out my hair, like if you don't have Joel Embiid on the court, the team's going to be significantly worse. So I also think that this could be the best lineups we could construct without Embiid during the Embiid era.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think the versatility is awesome. A couple more quick thoughts on Summer League, then we'll move on a little bit. I thought Isaiah Joe looked pretty good. I think he's really kind of feeling the pressure a little bit of maybe like his career arc is not the same, sure. I guess, positive outlook that it once was. Like, I don't think he's portrayed as this surefire thing, but I thought he showed something last night. I think he's taking it personally. Took 12 3-pointers, which I absolutely love. I thought Grant Riller impressed me a ton. 12 points in 14 minutes is impressive stuff. Charlie Brown Jr. made a little bit of statement. And then another guy I just want to ask you about is Trevelin Queen, who personally, this is probably like outside of obviously the core guys who we already kind of talked about. This is who I'm most excited about. And I absolutely love this guy. I think he's a hooper and a dog. He has to fit your brand. Do you have any thoughts on Trevelin Queen?
I honestly wish I have watched more of him. I've only seen some of the highlights. Like, I'm not a big G League guy, so I'm looking forward to see what he can bring to the table. But based on everything I've seen, like obviously he has the pedigree. He was the G League MVP. He looks pretty athletic. He seems like he chucks from three. I believe he scored 43 points in a game against the Blue Coats last year, and that's what 44. Like that's what kind of made him stand out to the Sixers. So I'm looking forward to seeing him play in Summer League. I can't sit here and act like I'm an expert on it, but I think the fact that he's like 6'5", 6'6", like that's exactly what the Sixers should be using the end of their roster spots on. Because like a guy you mentioned there is like Charlie Brown Jr. I've just never seen it with him. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just because he's from Philly that everyone likes him. But like, I just am like, to me, he's like Matisse Thybulle with worse defense, but he can kind of shoot, but only at the G League level. I feel like his shot is super weird. Like I've just never really got it with Charlie Brown Jr. And I would like to see us use those end of the roster spots more on guys like Trevelin Queen, just based on everything that everyone has said. And when it comes down to like the end of rosters, I know that he's only on a two-way, but like I think you could probably find a guy better on a two-way, maybe even a guy like you said, like Grant Riller, who they had on a two-way last year. But kind of going back to the Isaiah Joe thing, like I love Isaiah Joe in theory, like, but the reality is like when you have a coach like Doc, he's not going to let Joe go through his streaks of like playing poorly, basically. Like he's a shooter. Like it's gonna come and go, and Doc is gonna pull him for little mistakes. And like I just don't really think that's beneficial to the development of a guy like him. Like I see an ideal role, like you said, he took 12 threes last night. Like that I would love to see some development as from him as a movement shooter, because he took a few threes off movement last night. He hit one really far, a really deep shot. He has crazy range, and like I don't know if he might even not make the team next year. Like if Queen outplays him in Summer League, the odds are Isaiah Joe probably is either traded to a team or his contract just isn't guaranteed, which is unfortunate because I liked him as a prospect coming out, and I think he's shown flashes, but like, the Sixers really need like surefire guys. And with a coach like Doc, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think what we're learning about Isaiah Joe is he's not a guy that just comes in and instant offense. He's more of a guy that needs to get in his flow. And unfortunately, that's kind of what the Sixers need in his role as a guy that can just come in and let it fly. Kind of what like Danny Green did in his little spurts where he would come in and just shoot from wherever. That's not really Isaiah Joe. And I think that's kind of what in everyone's head we had expected for him to grow into. And it's not really working out because of that. And real quick, one more thing on Trevelin Queen. Oh, wait, the Charlie Brown first. I think what the appeal to Charlie Brown is simply because he was something that the Sixers just didn't have. I think him showing up and just
plus athlete,
being athletic, being active, it was so far into this roster, being like, what is this guy like doing all this stuff? And I don't think the ceiling is sky high. I think he could potentially grow into a rotational piece if he can improve as a 3-point shooter. If he's just an above average 3-point shooter, I think he'll stick around, but I don't think there's that much more to be desired as much as I like him from a person aspect. For Trevelin Queen, I personally came across him watching the G League final where he did score 44 points. And he also, going into a timeout, walked over and just stomped on the Blue Coats logo. Which crap. And that was my first, like, who is this?
Didn't Shaq Harrison try to fight him or someone on the six? I can't even remember. Someone on the Blue Coats, like, tried to fight him.
It was Shaq Harrison. Miles Powell also got ejected. Trevelin Queen also got ejected. So that's kind of where I got introduced to him. And when I watched more and more, I'd be like, wow, this guy is pretty awesome. So I was personally heartbroken that he didn't play last night. I am excited to see what he can actually do on the court. We've kind of teased with it a little bit, but as the Sixers roster currently sits, they've got 16 guys for 15 spots. Do you think there's going to be kind of a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-2 trade, or do you think there's somebody that ends up getting cut?
Well, my hope was that there was a 2-for-1 trade, and I think it's something that we'll talk about in a little bit. But I do think that at this point in the offseason, like, obviously everyone's waiting for the Kevin Durant domino to fall. Like, I don't really think there's going to be any major trades or signings or anything like that until, the Durant thing happens. So I would imagine it's probably going to end up being kind of what I just described, where like either Queen or Joe are fighting for that end of roster spot. I think if they can find a deal where they can move out Thybulle and Korkmaz, they'll do it. I don't see a Tobias trade happening. Maybe a Thybulle and Korkmaz 2-for-1 trade to a team that kind of just like is either rebuilding or a team that is like just kind of desperate for wing defense and shooters off the bench, even though Korkmaz is more theoretically a shooter than in reality. So I don't know. It's tough to say. Like I personally would probably just guess because they non-guaranteed Queen's deal, but they also paid him $350,000, which is like very high for a training camp and summer league guy, like extremely high. Like Justin Anderson did not get nearly as much money when he just came into training camp for the team before last season. So like, I do think that it will probably just come down to like Queen and Joe for that last roster spot. And I personally, my whole thing with like Korkmaz and Thybulle is like, I think with Melton and House that Thybulle is less important to the team and the new vision of the team that they have. And then with Korkmaz, like it's hard to move him because he's got 2 years left, $5 million each year. And he just had the worst shooting year of his career. But like, I could easily see Isaiah Joe doing Korkmaz's job even better and making the minimum next year. So like, I would prefer a Korkmaz salary dump or Korkmaz and Thybulle for one player as opposed to cutting Queen or Joe, because like I've kind of seen what I need to see out of Thybulle and Korkmaz, and I don't think that they can play in the playoffs. And like regular season, sure, fine, here and there, there's value to that, but like we're paying them $4 and $5 million. We're not paying them the minimum, so like I expect more from those guys, and I expect that like we should just be putting all of the money that we can spend into guys that we know can play real minutes in the playoffs. And like Queen and Joe might have a shot at that, whereas I feel like Korkmaz and Thybulle just don't.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm drawing a blank on who the author was, but on one of the articles I read where they said an opposing team could have Furkan Korkmaz if you just ask nicely, which was a
John Hollinger said that.
Yeah. But yeah, rough blow for Furkan, but I do kind of think that's the state. As I kind of break this down, I think he is kind of the odd man looking out as much as like the Isaiah Joe I also think can make sense because of the non-guaranteed deal, but I agree. I don't think Tobias is going anywhere. I also don't mind the idea of using Matisse as like our trade chip going into the deadline. And I agree. I want zero part of him in the playoff rotation or being a part of that. But I still think he's a guy that you can kind of make look good in spurts and still keep value and find a way to flip him before he obviously needs to get extended or gets a big deal this next offseason. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, my only issue with that, and this is why I wanted to trade Thybulle a year ago, was I've never been a Matisse Thybulle guy. Like, if you listen to my podcast, you go back, like, from the second that I watched him in that Celtics series as a rookie, it was just giving me bad flashbacks to rookie Ben Simmons. And, like, Ben Simmons is a way better player than Matisse Thybulle. And, like, I've never been, like, super high on him. Like, I didn't think he deserved to start over Danny Green last year. I think that he's an 82-game player. I think that his defense is extremely good, but it's a little bit overrated because of the fact that he's just, like, such a gambler. And look, once again, we'll be saying in 2030, if Matisse Thybulle just shoots above average from three on decent volume, like, it's a joke I've been making for 2 years, which is like every announcing crew is like legally required to say this about Matisse Thybulle. But my thing is like, and I've talked about this on my podcast, like, I just don't really know how much, like, he doesn't really seem like he's like crazy about basketball. And in order to genuinely improve, like, look at the guys that we have on this team, like even guys that people aren't even huge fans of, like Tobias Harris. Like, a lot of people are anti-Tobias. Tobias, from where he was as a rookie to where he is now, is a massive development story. He was legitimately really bad for like 2-3 seasons, and he worked his ass off to get to the point where, like, he got, considered for an all-star team. So, like, the fact that you have a guy like that, like, who tried to work with Thybulle in the offseason, and Thybulle was asking him about, like, we should go surfing and doing, like, whatever. Like, my whole thing is like, he's not that committed. And I feel like he got exposed a little bit in the playoffs once again. And it seems like league-wide interest in him is so down. Yeah. And then on top of that, like, Morey's clearly been trying to get back positive value for him, and he can't. And then, like, when you can't extend him off, because right now he's eligible to be extended. You cannot extend him, because if you extend him, then his contract gets poison pilled, and it makes it really hard to move. And then if you don't extend him, he's going to have less trade value, kind of like Dante DiVincenzo last year, where, like, all the Bucks could get back was a wash Serge Ibaka. It's actually kind of a similar situation. DiVincenzo was injured, but and DiVincenzo was probably a better player than Thybulle, but, like, the value that you're going to get back for Thybulle is just so much lower than you would have hoped for. So it's unfortunate, but, like, look, his career isn't over. Like, he's still got a role in this league. I actually think Korkmaz does too. Like, I think Korkmaz could, like, if the Chicago Bulls got Korkmaz, like, I think he would be a fine 9th or 10th man, like, with their trade exception, like, totally fine. But, like, you're trying to get, like, legit positive value back for these two guys who you drafted and tried to develop but kind of failed at it. And I hope that, they can get back something, but I'm just not too optimistic, because I feel like he would have been traded by now if we could get back anything good.
Yeah. A lot of great points there. And I totally agree with kind of the defense is overrated point too. And the thing I'll say about that is, I think there's a vastly different, a huge difference between being a great individual defender and being a great team defender. And I think we see it, especially in the postseason, how just important it is knowing where to make the right rotations, when to switch. And the thing that Matisse is great at is he's kind of like you throw him at a guy and he just kind of follows that guy around. He'll get in his face, get the steals, blocks. I don't think he excels at, like, making the right reads on a team basis. And I think Joel Embiid's a guy specifically that I think he makes look bad often, in terms of when he either goes for that block from behind or reach around and try and poke it from behind, where the guy gets in front, it causes Joel to step up, and it leads to a bounce pass for his man for a lay-in quite often. And that's something that I think will continue to be an issue in the postseason. And also, following the Ben Simmons trade, like, we talked so much about, like, how great the spacing is going to be without Ben. And realistically, it's the same issues with Matisse Thybulle, except he can't pass or shoot. So it's like, you're doing, like, the same kind of dance for not enough reward in my mind. And it is very frustrating that it's like, this is where we're at, because it really has been kind of, I would argue, a regression at this point. And this is a guy who's 4 years in college and 3 years in the pros. Like, we should be just seeing a little more steps in the right direction at this point. And I know he still has his, like, fans out there. And I think in a different situation, in a different system, without, like, kind of the post dominance and how Joel Embiid centered the Sixers in, I think Thybulle could look very good in a more free flowing system. And I still, like, wish him the best, obviously, but I do think the writing is on the wall for his time on the Sixers, whether it is this offseason. It would break my heart to let him walk for free, just because I think that's not a good way to build an organization. You really kind of are punished for that in the long run. So I would like to get something for him, but I don't know. It's frustrating that it's gotten to this point.
it doesn't even really seem like we can get a future first for him, which like
Yeah.
a year ago, if we had traded him, we could have probably got like a decent first.
Mhm.
So it does suck because like they tried to do that and then figure out a way to flip that to the Rockets to get Eric Gordon, and they couldn't even do that. So like it's rough, but at the same time, like once again, like I'm not like I'm not the like you got to be a worker, you got to work really hard, but like I'm all for work-life balance. I'm all for whatever, but like they say that he's working hard on his game this season, and like I'm willing to give him one more shot. And I talk myself into this stuff all the time. Like as fans, we're just poisoned to like, oh yeah, no, here's a move I hated, or here's a guy I didn't like, and then just talking yourself into it until you actually have to watch him play the basketball games again. But our defense is going to be really good next year if he comes back. I'll say that much, because he's just another really good like defender, all things considered, even with the offense. Like to have that many guys that you can throw out there defensively with Joel Embiid on the back line is going to be something to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Sixers have done everything possible to kind of boost his trade value, starting with like the Keith Pompey piece that dropped at the beginning of the offseason, the same one that said he's eligible
trying.
for a 5-year, $186 million extension. And one of the things it also said in there is like, this is his first offseason to truly improve, because his first one was clouded by COVID, and his second one he was with the Australia national team. And I'm just kind of like, okay, why could he not improve during these times? But regardless,
Jason Tatum, by the way, also played in the Olympics, and then was the best player on a finals team last year. I just want to say he also had COVID multiple times. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, very true. To move on a little bit, talk a little bit of slop here. The Eric Gordon stuff just continues to resurface and will not go away. Do you think there's any traction there? Realistically, kind of looking at it, like they would have to jump through some hoops to make some movements without trading Tobias. Do you think there's any chance a trade gets done, or is this just going to continue to mill around?
I mean, I have a hard time seeing it. I do think that if they were able to trade Thybulle or Tobias or whoever, it probably would have been done by now. So unless there's some crazy cap gymnastics that they could do to do like a 4-for-1 or a 5-for-1 trade, similar to the Indiana trade we saw with Brogdon going to Boston or Christian Wood to Dallas, I just have a hard time seeing how they could make this kind of trade work, because we still don't know what James Harden's extension is, but we would imagine it's somewhere in the 30 millions. And if it's anything above 29 million, which we all think it will be because he made 47 and could have opted in, then I do. And I know he wants to give the team flexibility and stuff, but like the hard cap makes it so that like he would have to take 29 million if we're sending out George Niang, Thybulle, Korkmaz. We got to find spots for all these guys to land, whether it's in Houston or other teams. Mm-hmm. And just to match the salary and then also not have any of your future picks, especially like I don't want to give up our 29 pick for Eric Gordon. Like he's a very nice player. And I would feel fantastic about our top 9 guys if we were able to get Eric Gordon for a 4-for-1 trade. Like I would love that. And then just sign like 2 guys to vet minimums, even keep the 15th roster spot open. Who cares at that point? But my whole thing is like, it just seems like a massive long shot. If it didn't happen on draft night, Tobias wasn't moved, Thybulle wasn't moved, I just don't see a salary matching standpoint where it could work. But he would be a great 6th, 7th man for this team, and I would love it.
No, I agree with you. I think it would have happened if it was going to happen, it kind of would have already. I also kind of am in the aspect of like, that might be one Rocket too many. And I know there's so many jokes about like the Philadelphia Rockets, but from what they've done so far, like I'm very much on board with both the PJ Tucker and the Daniel House signings. I think the negatives are very much maximized with these guys. For Tucker, obviously it's the age thing, but the stuff he does, like you're signing him for more than what he just brings on the court. Like, I mean, just look at the videos of him, Harden and Embiid at the Rubin household this weekend. Like he's going to be there for the vibes. He's going to be there to do the little things and show this team. Like we've been missing a PJ Tucker for so long that it's unfortunate you have to overpay and kind of give him this, but you're making this payment and this contract for really these next 2 years. And then you kind of figure it out at the end of it. And same with Daniel House. Like for sure, he is not the perfect player, but I'm way more confident rolling out Daniel House than I would be with either Thybulle or Korkmaz in the way that we did last year. And at like, maybe it's an overpay for a guy that was on a 10-day for some stretch of last year. But again, like you do this to make your team better and you kind of roll the dice with it. For Eric Gordon, like he would fit well. He's another guy who can just sling it. And like from a 3-point aspect, a catch and shoot guy, he would be feasting off Embiid's gravity and Harden's passing ability. But just like the hoops that it would take to find a way to land him, I think might be not quite worth it. And another guy I kind of want to swing to, I appreciate the investigative journalism on Reggie Bullock. Obviously kind of stirred the Twitter world on fire with kind of the reposting the pic saying he's the next Sixer, next coming to Philly, all this. He's a guy that I've talked about since the beginning of the offseason. If there was a potential Tobias trade, the Mavs were a team that I had circled on like a Bullock and Davis Bertans or whatever makes the money work, but Bullock being like the main target for it just because I see the fit terrific in Philly. It's been pretty clear from your reporting that he is not coming to Philly, but what would your thoughts on kind of be a potential Reggie Bullock? Yeah. But you'd be in on him if it was a possibility?
Oh, 100%. I think Reggie Bullock would be, from a vibe standpoint, from what the Sixers need, I think he would be a great, like, he would be kind of, as my friend Marty Teller said, where we have a Reggie Bullock size hole missing in this roster. Just kind of what we were talking about is like, just like a guy who's just going to chuck. He's going to put up 7-8 threes a game. He's going to try his ass off on defense. You know, he's a little bit of a streaky shooter, but that's kind of what you expect from these high volume guys. You know, someone who can space from the corners, can, you know, capably attack a closeout. I do think that, like, I don't see it happening, obviously, now. I think, like, what happened with the Mavs this offseason, losing Jalen Brunson, it would be a pretty massive swing from them to be like, okay, we're also going to move on for Reggie Bullock, who started playoff games for us. So we're moving on from, like, arguably our second best player in Jalen Brunson, and then one of our top 5 or 6 guys in Reggie Bullock. And, you know, we're bringing in Christian Wood, who's very talented, but, like, has had his issues defensively and just as like a locker room guy. So I think having a good locker room guy like Reggie there is important for them. Having a guy who's a willing shooter playing off Luka is important for them, but also he would be like literally the perfect fit for the Sixers. And I talked about if we got Eric Gordon, even like 33-year-old Eric Gordon as a bench guy, I would feel pretty good about this roster. Like, I would feel amazing about this roster if we could just take Thybulle and Korkmaz, move them to the Mavericks, put Reggie Bullock in the starting lineup, and then you can have House, Tucker, Melton, and Reed as your 4 guys off the bench, and that would be absolutely amazing. But does seem like a long shot. I think his friends were just messing around on Twitter, on Instagram. Unfortunately, they're both from Philly, and I think they're just trying to make it happen and hoping that it happened. But he unfortunately denied the rumors. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort on their part, and gave us a little bit of sliver of hope. The last guy I want to get into is Josh Hart, and obviously Villanova product. A guy, it just feels like the perception is he's more available than I would expect, and the appeal to me and him, the appeal about him to me is like his plus rebounding ability for his size. Another guy that can space the floor, be a 3-point shooter. The Blazers have talked about how they want to upgrade their defense, and Matisse Thybulle is kind of the obvious, like, hey, take this guy, float that out there, kind of fit in that. Is Josh Hart a guy that appeals to you, or do you think there's a chance the Sixers can land it, or not on the table?
He definitely appeals. I don't think that that's a realistic pot. I thought Reggie Bullock was more realistic because, you know, Reggie's a little bit older. You know, he's been pretty inconsistent, whereas I feel like Hart has really developed over the last year or two, turned himself into a really good defender. Like you said, one of the best guard/wing rebounders in the NBA, willing 3-point shooter, good 3-point shooter, even has some on-ball juice, scored like 50 points in a game this past year. Like, I know that there have been like rumors about him being out there, but I think that in any Josh Hart trade that is made, it's where it's an obvious upgrade where you go from Josh Hart to OG Anunoby or something like that, because, you know, he was the main guy they got back for CJ McCollum, who was a guy that they had for a decade and they loved. And, you know, it would be a pretty bad look if they turned around and just traded him for a guy like Thybulle, who, like, we know is pretty inconsistent. Whereas I feel like Josh Hart is kind of like an ideal fifth starter type, especially on a contender. And I feel like with the moves that the Blazers have made around Dame, getting Gary Payton the second, getting, you know, Jeremy Grant, like, I think the idea is kind of like get defensive guys who can survive offensively, kind of similar to the Sixers. plan this offseason. So I do think that I would be pretty surprised if we were able to land Josh Hart. Although, if I remember correctly, he has like a weird contract. Like, I think he only has this year and next year left on his deal. So he might become available at a certain point if they feel like they're not going to be able to keep him because Dame makes so much money and they just re-sign Simons and all that stuff. But for now, I think it would probably only be for like an obvious upgrade.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty true too. Unfortunately, I think he would be a pretty ideal piece to add to the Sixers core. It has been frustrating, kind of the Kevin Durant hold on the market, how it has paused thing. And I also find it funny how people are like caught up in arms about how like the Nets are going to demand like an all-time trade return. And it's like, well, yeah, this is one of the all-time players to ever hit the trade market. So that kind of makes sense in my mind, especially considering like looking at what DeJounte Murray is, his return, looking at the Rudy Gobert return. But I do think the NBA world has slowed down while waiting for kind of the Kevin Durant shoe to fall. Are you going through a little bit of kind of slop withdrawal while this is all happening?
Oh yeah, absolutely, dude. I'm really suffering over here. I need some slop. It does feel like we have, a little gap right now. Like, of course, the Nets are going to be asking for everything. It's Kevin Durant, one of the 15, 20 greatest basketball players of all time. Like, who wouldn't ask for, like, people were up in arms when they asked for Devin Booker from the Suns. And it's like, well, Kevin Durant's better than Devin Booker. Why is that such an absurd ask? Like, I think that Booker's an awesome player. And obviously the Suns aren't going to trade one of their best young players ever. But at the same time, like, it's Kevin Durant. Like, those are the kind of things that the Nets should be doing now. And unfortunately, it is holding up the trade market, the slot market, and it's making me very upset. But at the same time, I think the payoff whenever we get the KD and eventual Kyrie and potentially Ben Simmons 2.0 trades, there's going to be another wave of slot probably in a few weeks to maybe even close to training camp. So I at least appreciate that, like, we'll be spreading out the slop so that when it does happen, it will be a big moment. And I would imagine it probably happens sometime in the next month or so. My thought has been the whole time, it's like, it'll probably happen after Summer League when everyone meets up and they're all talking there. But like, I have a hard time seeing who you would ever want to trade Kevin Durant for if you're the Nets. Like, there are a lot of really good young players out there and pick packages, but like, Mikal Bridges does nothing for me if I'm the Nets. Like, I want like the Brandon Ingrams. I want like guys that are like, could be legit number ones, number twos on a good team. Like, Mikal Bridges is a nice complimentary piece, but like that just doesn't really do anything. I'm swinging for the stars. I'm asking for everything if I'm the Nets.
Yeah, definitely, as they should. And they're in a difficult spot as an organization. So I think it's going to be a waiting game, and I bet they pretty much have to based on what they have. So Trill, I appreciate you for coming on today. Guys, make sure you're checking out the Ball podcast if you have not already. You are not doing it right as a Sixers fan and an NBA fan in general if you haven't checked that out. So once again, thank you for coming on. And make sure to like and subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, and we will catch you next time.